We are going to look at modern art. This lecture will be probably longer than a lot of the other ones because I'm going to go over the major changes that happen in art from 1800 to 1945. So we're going to see art kind of changing every couple of years. Up until now in our history study, in the Renaissance and the Baroque, the Greeks, we've been seeing basic styles stay the same for hundreds of years. In the modern world, it's not going to be like that. In the modern world, it's going to be every new group of artists is looking to learn from their predecessors, but to do the next thing, to be new. Make it new, like Ezra Pound the poet says, is really what it's all about in modern art. And I'm going to take you through a lot of it. You could do probably an entire semester class on what we're doing today. And I want to get you through it so for our last week, we can look at American art and where the United States and New York City in particular becomes the leading place for art in the world. And we'll look at modern to postmodern next week in two different lectures. So to get to that point, we got to go through a lot of modern art. Now, for this modern art section, there's a quiz. It's multiple choice. You should be used to the quizzes by now. This quiz is 15 questions rather than 3. That should give you some idea of how much more information is in here. And then there'll be a lecture assessment, and the lecture assessment will ask you what your favorite art was, and hopefully you'll all find something. There's a lot of kind of cool, interesting stuff going on here. And then also 4 questions on things that you learned from the lecture, kind of what we've been doing all semester. So let's get into the very fun, wild world of modern art. Okay. So before we start here, let's see what this modern world looks like. So the Rue de Rivoli is one of the most famous streets in Paris, a commercial street with shops on the first floor and then expensive apartments on the upper floors. This was made when Paris was rebuilt after a peasant uprising, and they completely leveled Paris and rebuilt it as a modern city. Straight streets, kind of like the spokes of a wheel leading into roundabouts that take you to important points in the city. You can see that they're kind of beginning to anticipate the wider streets of modernity. Even though we don't have cars yet with all the horse buggies, the idea that there's going to be more people, wider streets, kind of a sense of modernity. And in a modern city, because of colonialism like Paris, you don't just have people from France living in Paris, you have people from colonies, people from all over the world, out-of-state workers, people who are expatriating, especially because Paris is the center of the cultural world, certainly the center of the painting world, and has been really since Paris started their official art school and their yearly salons, their major shows on art. It is the place to be an artist. On the right, you're seeing the kinds of clothes that can be bought now in these shops. So people don't have to make their own clothes. When they're middle class and they have a little bit of money, they can go out and buy the umbrella, the hat, the sofa, all of these things are now accessible to this middle class that has been arriving since the Industrial Revolution began in the late early 1700s. So we had left off on the Baroque era in a supplemental lecture, and I'd kind of described art up until about 1700. In 1700, you have the Enlightenment. In the Enlightenment, philosophers and theorists are getting away from a strict belief that religion solves everything. Copernicus is showing us that our Earth is not the center of the universe. As we go further into this, Darwin is going to show us that we are no different than other animal forms. And so, in this era of the Enlightenment, people are beginning to believe that perhaps governance should not be done by kings and dictators, but perhaps maybe people should be able to govern and that they have certain rights. And the Enlightenment will lead to the American Revolution and the French Revolution. In this time period, we have a painting style called neoclassicism. And neoclassicism, Jacques-Louis David, great French painter, is one of the best of these artists. Now, here we are seeing where the French Revolution failed, and in fact, a general comes into power and also modernizes Paris before it goes off the rails with too many wars, Napoleon Bonaparte. So we are seeing the style of neoclassicism really done well here. Very clear space like we would see in the Renaissance, sober colors rather than heightened colors, and then classicizing either modern subject matter or showing classical tales from ancient Rome or the Greeks. So here we are looking at this really great painting of Napoleon with his name in stone, following in the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who beats the Romans by crossing mountains. And we are doing the same thing here as he is crossing the Alps, leading the charge with his horse rearing up, the wind blowing the horse's mane forward, the drapery moving forward, the tail blowing forward, and him pointing forward. Very heroic painting. Not actually truthful in what was happening, but very, very heroic and patriotic for the French people. This is a student of Jacques-Louis David, Jean-Auguste Dominique Ung. Ung is a painter who transitions between the neoclassic and the romantic. Here is a neoclassic painting he does of Jupiter and Thetis. We are seeing the subject of Homer's Iliad. The nymph Thetis is pleading with Jupiter to intervene on behalf of her son, the warrior Achilles. In the background, Jupiter's wife Juno is spying on this because Jupiter is always cheating all the time. So he's showing us the clean contours, clear colors, precise draftsmanship that is indebted to David that we see in Ung as well. We also see here in Ung his movement towards Romanticism. And I don't go a lot into Romanticism here. And I probably don't show as much as I should have in terms of the landscape painting in Romanticism. I think landscapes are the best thing in Romanticism, frankly. In Romanticism, you have these great landscape paintings in America and Europe, and they show this love of the sublime and also a new form of kind of religion, the deists, which Thomas Jefferson would have been one. The deists believe that God made everything, but basically leaves us alone. So where you find God is in a sunset, you find it in a beautiful canyon, in the creation itself. We also, in Romanticism, we get some dubious subject matter, especially the kind of love of what they call Orientalism. So we see these other civilizations in Asia as very exotic. And here we see from Ung two examples of him really, I think, romanticizing the idea of a harem. And a harem is women odalisques are basically sex slaves from the Middle East. And we are seeing here these odalisques on the right, very much a European fantasy. I'm pretty sure Ung never saw an actual harem. Notice the women seem to be pretty happy. They're playing music and dancing and naked and hanging out and very free, and looks like a kind of a good time. Not what it really is. In Le Grand Odalisque on the left, Ang is taking proportion, and he's playing around with it the way Michelangelo was in The Last Judgment. He has elongated her backbone with about 3 or 4 vertebrae and is playing around with the leg in terms of the upper leg appears to be connecting up here somewhere rather than down here. So he is taking license with the painting. He is trying to create more sexual energy in the painting by these elongations. Delacroix, I think we get a more sober romantic artist. He is famous for painting Liberty Leading the Charge, really famous painting about the Revolution. Here, I wanted to show this in contrast to Ang's painting of harems. So here, he is showing us a less of a mirror to the world that we would be getting in the Ang, where you don't see the brush strokes. Instead, you see, the illusion of like a mirror to the world. Well, Delacroix, he's painting a little quicker, he paints a little bit thicker, and we're going to see that today in art, where painting is becoming more about the surface, less about the three-dimensional perspective illusions. And here we're seeing his version of a harem, a little less optimistic probably than what we were seeing from Ang. The first major modern style in the mid-1800s is realism. Realism is about showing everyday people, the lower class, the working class, and making them into giant heroic paintings like the Stonebreakers. Very large painting where you don't see the faces of the workers. You simply see them breaking stones to make gravel to pave roads. And you also see their probably handmade clothing, and their clothing that is kind of beat up from doing this very hands-on hard labor. Courbet is painting the life around him rather than painting Napoleon or glorizing other parts of the world. He is trying to paint the world as it looks. And here in this burial, which is 20 feet by 10 feet, he does this burial not of a king, not of some important hero, but just some everyday person in this small town in France. Influenced by Courbet is Edouard Manet. And Manet's Luncheon in the Grass is kind of one of those watershed moments in art. So he's joining Courbet in painting modern life. And he is also making this painting based on Rococo fête gallants that were the last part of the Baroque. We are seeing modern Parisians, middle-class people, middle-class clothing, where the men are clothed. The woman is looking at us nude. They have just had some kind of picnic. Perhaps also sexual dalliance has gone on here as well. The configuration of the three figures is based on another work of art in the Louvre. And painting is now referring back to its own history and not pretending that it's anything else. The modeling, the light and shadow on the figure, was considered to be really rough and crude because there's not a lot of darks on this figure. The figure we think maybe was painted from a photograph that had a flash on it, and the flash would have drained all of the shadows out of the figure. So this was a painting that was refused by the official salon show and put into a salon of the refusals. So there were so many artists being refused for the state show that artists were getting very upset, and they decided to show the refused paintings as well. And that's where Manet's painting shows up. And we begin to have a history of official shows, state shows, and then other shows that are not part of the state, often being more popular or having more artistic merit. So here in this print, we are seeing a borrowed composition from a Raphael, where we see the three figures here in the Judgment of Paris, and the exact three figures, the woman looking at us, the way the guy is leaning here, but now been turned into modern art of the middle class. And again, the fete gallant that had been a very popular kind of painting genre for a couple hundred years. Wealthy people going into idealized gardens and forests and having orgies and picnics. But now we're seeing the middle class doing it. After Manet, in the 1860s, in the 1870s, we get a new group of young artists called the Impressionists. This partly is able to happen because of the mass producing of paint that is now not paint you have to make yourself, but paint that you can buy in tubes like we saw in our painting lecture. And then also you can buy collapsible easels. And these easels you can collapse, and then you can set them up and paint in nature. And Claude Monet is one of the artists that is doing this. In his painting Impression Sunrise from 1872, we get the beginning of the Impressionist artists. They are painting quickly in nature. They are painting thickly with the paint. They're no longer trying to make the illusion save the water here. It's just strokes out of the brush. So it's brightly colored. He doesn't use black anymore. His shadows are all cool colors with warm highlights that we studied in the Elements lecture. Here we see it again. In this painting, he's painting on a boat, and the paint is really bright because of the lack of black. So think about this. We've been seeing black used in paintings with Caravaggio, with Da Vinci, and now we see an artist who realizes that the paint can become brighter by not using that, and by also putting warm and cool colors next to each other to heighten each other. It's about color, it's about a feeling rather than an exact representation of the world. After the Impressionists, you get a group of artists that we call the Post-Impressionists, who are just kind of doing their own thing and have been influenced by Impressionism. With Georges Seurat, we see middle-class people on a Sunday hanging out, just kind of having that leisure time that comes from being able to live in a city and work a job where you get some time off and enough money to survive, and also to do things like go to cafes, to buy some clothing, and just kind of enjoy life a little bit. This painting is made out of dots, that he is putting dots, millions of dots next to each other, that when you stand back from it, you get this really beautiful painting of middle-class life. Another post-impressionist is Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh is heightening the color, using it right out of the tube. So his blue skies are really blue. The red wallpaper in the night cafe is the pure red out of the tube. No using the colors in the way that we see from Delacroix, where notice the reds here aren't so bright. The reds have light and shadow on them and look like they might really look in a real room. Van Gogh has taken us to a new place. Now he's still making the sky blue, he's still making the light yellow, he's making the pool table green, but his heightening of color is taking us to a kind of new place in art. And his art also is expressing his kind of inner feelings that he has. Gauguin is a contemporary who lived briefly with Van Gogh. He is going to Tahiti and the South Pacific to get away from modern society. He is painting natives there. He is also brightening the color as well, as you see in the vermilion down here and the yellow trees in the background. And his paintings somewhat almost look as if maybe they're sewn together or they're collage-like. Another important post-impressionist is Cézanne. With Cézanne, he is not interested in the surface anymore that the Impressionists were interested in. He's interested in the underneath geometry, and he is taking us away from the surface to that geometry. He's painting still lifes and Mont Saint-Victoire many, many times. In this painting, notice that he has completely flattened the space. The brightness of the colors are not creating a sense of perspective and deep space, but instead a very flattened space. And we're seeing the strokes of the paint and how they're all kind of patching together here, rather than seeing a lot of detail like we would have seen from the Northern Renaissance. In the 20th century, the avant-garde, the art trying to make new and in a way disassociating itself from everyday people who maybe won't understand art as it's becoming more crude and changing all the time. Matisse's The Joy of Life is one of the most important paintings that we've looked at today. In this painting and the Fauve painting, he is using bright, bright color like Van Gogh was doing, but instead of where Van Gogh was going, where the sky was blue and the people were painted people color, he's painting people purples and greens. The sky is blue, the ground, the earth is all these different colors. Matisse frees artists from having to use color that is exactly the way the world works. Instead, artists can use color to however they want to feel and make us feel in the painting. And that is an important part of German Expressionism here from Ernst Kirchner in this street in Dresden. We no longer, it's almost like the Gothic era again, where we no longer are seeing the anatomies of the Renaissance. We are getting these ghost-like people painted in all these different colors. A street that doesn't look like a street but is pink bubblegum color. We are heightening through arbitrary colors and wavering contours like we saw from the screed from Edward Munch to increase feeling in painting. And that feeling in painting is going to continue as painting becomes more abstract. This is Kandinsky, his composition 4 on the left, and his totally abstract black lines from 1911. Kandinsky starts by still including recognizable things in paintings like figures, but the perspectives are turning and changing. We have a rainbow here, a sun over here, mountains or something here. We're not 100% sure what we're seeing anymore. Now it's about formal elements, line, color, space, and feeling. Pablo Picasso, he's influenced by Cézanne, and he's going to take Cézanne a step further in Cubism. So the Daminels of Avignon in 1907, he has created a painting that has no foreground and no background. It's completely flat. He has also created figures who don't have the round, smooth curviness of previous figure painting that we've seen. Instead, they are like diamonds. They are broken into geometric shapes. And on the right, you see the influence of Picasso viewing African masks. So his influences are no longer the Renaissance. His influences are African art, Egyptian art, and Mayan art. That is what's making painting new. Another example from his contemporary George Braque here. Again, the lack of three-dimensional space. When Braque really gets into it as Cubism progresses, we start to see kind of a sense of no ability to read the plane whatsoever in the immigrant here. We might have a guitar here, we might have an arm here, there might be a nose and an eye here, but it is all becoming very, very difficult to figure out. In Italy, we have a metaphysical kind of painting, dreams being painted by Giorgio de Chirico. In his disquieting muses, we are seeing something that looks like it might be pulled directly from a dream. These mysterious figures, these long shadows, and this giant mystery of these disconnected images that have the disconnected quality that you might have in a dream. In Italy also, we have a group called the Futurists. The futurists in the early 20th century are falling in love with the machine, that maybe people should be more like machines. And we are seeing the admirers of speed and technology, youth and violence, the car, the airplane, the industrial city. Here we're looking at Bassione's unique forms of continuity in space, a type of human figure that is also a field of energy and a field of movement rather than the detail of the eyes, the nose, the arms, and stuff like that. F.T. Marinetti is the guiding theoretic force in the futurists. He believes that the world should be destroyed and rebuilt more like machines, and is playing around with a new kind of typography, exploding letters and words, and showing what the words look like, rather than simply having words on a line like in a book. In Bala's dynamism out of A Dog on a Leash, we see the sense and the influence of film, the influence of the moving image on painting, as we see the dog's legs, the person who owns the dog, the chain, the ears, the tail, everything working at these different speeds. And then all of that optimism in the early part of the 20th century falls away because of World War I. In World War I, you have a war of European powers who are trying to divvy up the rest of the world that they are colonizing. The world has machine guns. This war has airplanes, trench warfare, really poor tactics, and ultimately not much is accomplished in the war other than a lot of people being massacred. And at the end of it, the Ottoman Empire being dismantled and turned into modern states of Iraq and Iran and Turkey. So here's the reality of the war here. Heroism, and in this war, really absurd things are going on. Like in 1916, in Christmas, the sides, so the French get out of their trenches, the Germans get out of their trenches, they're fighting each other in this war, and they meet each other in the no man's zone, and they exchange Christmas gifts, they get drunk together, they play soccer, and then get back in their trenches and fight each other to the death. A total war. The complete absurdity of that, and again, the uselessness of this war leads to I think the most important movement we're studying today, which is Dada. So Dada starts in the neutral country Switzerland, in Zurich. Pacifists from Germany, Hugo Ball, is doing spoken word poetry in a bar where he is speaking gibberish. Artists are showing paintings in bathrooms, and a new movement is coming. So it is anti-art, anti-middle class, anti-politicians, anti-good manners, everything that keeps this war going on. It is a political edge and a type of art not serving the state, not serving religion, but trying to serve people by refusing to live in the logic of the world that created this war, instead being totally illogical. Like Picabia, the comedian of the Dada artists, with his child carburetor here, influenced by the idea of the machine people of the futurists, and playing around with kind of silly ways of diagramming everything. Sphere of the migraine, destroy the future, strange stuff like that. Marcel Duchamp, who we have mentioned on several occasions, he is taking art away from making anything. We have seen the fountain before, and here we have the bicycle wheel, where he has taken a bicycle apart and then drilled the front tire into a stool, rendering the stool useless and the bicycle useless, and he calls this utterly useless. So you can't ride it, you can't sit on it. What do you do with it? It must be art. Same thing with the urinal. It's on a pedestal, it's not in a bathroom. What is it? It must be art. So art now through the Dadas is something that can be designated and have a sense of humor to it. We see him writing a mustache and a goatee on an image of the Mona Lisa, writing the letters LHOOQ, that in French means that she has a nice butt, which is impossible to know from the painting in this cheap postcard reproduction. Here, we see the artist playing chess with a socialite in Los Angeles named Yves Babetz. So his very first museum show is in Santa Monica. And in Santa Monica, he's showing his paintings and his sculptures, but he's also performing playing chess with anyone that wants to play chess with him. Yves Babetz is kind of the Kim Kardashian of her age, tells the news media that she will be there nude playing chess with him. And in this photograph, we see him completely engrossed in the game and not looking at this voluptuous young LA woman. And again, the absurdity reigning in everything that he does. From Dada and from Hugo Ball, we get the spoken word poetry. In this spoken word poetry, we are seeing words that appear to be words, but are nonsense. And the complete nonsense of all of this is kind of how the Dadaists feel about the nonsense of the political factions telling them to stay in the war and that there's some sort of glory in war. Also in Dada, like in modern warfare, where bombs drop on the good soldiers and the bad soldiers, you see artists using chants. Max Ernst is taking a paint can and swinging the paint can over the canvas lying on the floor, creating these images that happen by chance. ARP is allowing these collage squares to fall wherever they land and then pasting them on. After the war, Dada will break up. The war is kind of holding them all together. So Dada will remain political in Berlin. In France, they will follow the guy on the right here, André Breton, who is talking about an art about dreams and psychic automatism. The notion that great art should come directly from the unconscious, influenced by Freud, and that your conscious mind should not make any rational decisions. And we get great surrealist art like Merritt Oppenheim's Luncheon in Fur, great artists like Salvador Dali, who is painting in a somewhat classical style, but painting really strange imagery, like in The Persistence of Memory, where we see Dali's skull without, Dali's skin on his skull without the bones, melting clocks, like it's so hot that it's melted time, a tree growing out of a wooden box or a dead tree that has come out of a wooden box, ants on a pocket watch, water floating in the background. That is the surrealist, the dreamlike, the absurd imagery of surrealism. Surrealism from Magritte is questioning space, and also here in his Treachery of Images, he's painting a pipe and then telling us this is not a pipe. Well, of course, what he's saying is this is an image of a pipe. You can't put tobacco in it. And this is also kind of the beginning of, up until now in books, when you saw an image, the text was always recognizable and enhanced the image. Here, you can no longer trust the text and the image to go along with each other. In Mexico, we get a great surrealist artist in Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo is doing self-portraits of herself and the pain that she is going through with her separation and loneliness from her artist husband, Diego Rivera. And also, she had been hit by a bus, and the pain that she is going through physically, the pain she is going through in her heart with two Fridas, where she has actually cut her heart out in one of the images. And Frida is always looking sternly back at us. She is not simply taking a gaze. In Russia, suprematism is an art movement of basic geometric shapes, circles, squares, lines, rectangles, in a limited range of colors, founded by Kazimir Malevich in Russia in 1915. He is creating an art that he calls the supremacy of pure artistic feeling rather than the depiction of objects. No core meaning at all. Simply formalism here, and shapes floating together in space, seemingly without gravity. In the Russian Revolution, the Communist Bolshevik Revolution, we get that same supremacy, but now being used with industrial intentions, the modernizing of Russia that Vladimir Tatlin is showing us. In his counter-reliefs, he's using not marble and wood to make sculptures to carve. He's using rope and steel and industrial materials to make abstract sculptures. And with El Lissitzky, we are seeing abstract sculptures, but with meaning coming from the revolution, like the red triangle that would be on the insignia on the Bolshevik soldiers, in an image here showing us the civil war between the Red and the White Army, with slogans happening, but still floating in space, very much like Malevich suprematism. From Piet Mondrian, we get De Stijl. From De Stijl, Mondrian, who had been a very good landscape painter in the early 20th century, the effect of Cubism and Expressionism has him simplifying, intensifying the colors from Expressionism, and then taking the Cubist sensibility and flattening all the space, and eventually leading to paintings that are only vertical and horizontal lines, no more diagonals, no more curves. They are asymmetric rather than symmetric, and are only using the primary colors that are becoming kind of the modern symbol of colors in the style. At the German school, the Bauhaus, this is a new kind of school that is teaching people how to design, being influenced by De Stijl, being influenced by constructivism, and using simple geometric solutions for designing modern living spaces, modern kitchens. Notice how the kitchen space here has a lot of the qualities of a De Stijl painting. The simplicity, the idea that the new technologies should be used to make things simple to use, like an iPhone, for example. And that the modern interior has abstract paintings, abstract images on the rugs, geometrically sound compositions in the living spaces, and the idea that we are decorating dragons and gargoyles and all this other stuff no longer applicable. If you go to IKEA, you see the effect of the Bauhaus on modern living spaces today. In the Bauhaus in Dessau, the school that they built a school that looks exactly like the colleges that we go to today. The modern community colleges built out of steel, glass, and cement. And they are made to be functional with huge sweeping geometric areas to them. In the dorm room, notice that in the dorm room, again, when we look at the De Stijl painting with the square and the rectangles that go horizontally and vertically, look at how the dorm room has all the same attributes. Vertical rectangles, horizontal rectangles, a square broken up by rectangles, simple stripes and rectangles on the bedspread, very simple reusable cabinets and drawers and desks, all the stuff that you would see at most university campuses and community college if they have living spaces in them, exactly what dorms look like today. The legacy of the Bauhaus and the legacy of all this modernism is the modern city that we live in, the modern skyscraper, the steel and glass and simple geometric shapes that we studied earlier in our architecture lecture. Okay, so a lot of stuff here. 15-question quiz, lecture assessment. Let me say goodbye to you. And I hope you enjoyed the modern art lecture here. A lot of stuff happening. And we have a couple more lectures on contemporary art coming up. So we're going to end our class on art after World War II and what has been going on. I will talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.